Hi, this is Pete from FigLife.com. I just want to take a few minutes and go over some questions that I commonly get about the fig trees I ship out so that you can have that information and be able to have a very successful growing season with your new fig. So the first thing I want to talk about is watering the fig tree. It's probably the most important single thing to know when you get your fig tree. So this is an example of a tree that I would ship out. This is actually St. Martin. And I'll probably let this grow for another week or two, and then I'll go ahead and ship this out. But this is typical of a tree that I'll be shipping. It's in a 4x4x9 tree pot, and that's the size pot that I almost always use to ship my fig trees. And when I ship them, they're normally going to be a pretty good size. They'll have, you can see this is 9 inches tall, this pot, and then the growth up here is probably at least another 9 inches. Usually it's more like 12 to 15 inches. And it's got a pretty good root mass inside of this pot here. And with the size that these trees are, they've undergone a transition. You know, when I first start growing these things, I usually direct root in these 4x4x9 tree pots. And when I first start growing, you got to be very careful about providing too much water, because if you overwater, you're going to have problems. But you're going to go through a transition period. And when it gets large like this, the concern with these is not underwatering. Actually, I got that wrong. The concern with these is not overwatering and getting rot. That's not the concern. The concern is underwatering. So I'll just share with you some tips that I have that can ensure that you provide the right amount of water, or at least the same amount of water that I use when I'm taking care of these trees. So I've done hundreds and hundreds of trees, and I've watered those trees many times. So I've gone through this cycle of providing the right amount of water to these trees probably thousands of times. And it's always in these 4x4x9 tree pots. And so having done this so many times, I'm very familiar with precisely how much water I give to these trees over the various stages of their growth cycle. And so I'll just go ahead and share with you the system I use. You know, I'm not saying this is like some sort of scientific method or the definitive method, or that, you know, somebody else might not have an alternative method that is just as good. But this is the method I use. And if you want to water the tree in a similar manner to how I'm doing it, this is how I'm doing it. So basically, I use a scale. It's just a kitchen scale like this, and I just use this to water the trees. So when I'm watering the trees, it'll be the tree pot, it'll be the soil, and it'll be the tree itself. I don't have anything else in here. So when I ship these, they're going to come with some bamboo sticks to prevent the tree from getting crushed in shipping, and there's going to be some tape over the top of this, and there's going to be some wet paper towel inside. And all of that is just to keep everything in place when it's in shipping so that it arrives in a good condition. That is not stuff that you need to keep in there after you get the tree. The bamboo sticks could be it could be nice to keep the bamboo sticks in there, but you don't want to have the bamboo sticks in there when you're weighing it using this method, because I don't have that stuff in there, so it's going to throw your numbers off. So basically, when you get it just like this, if you weigh it, I'm going to have watered these to a weight of 650 grams. And that weight is enough where I can keep this under a grow light. The grow lights I use inside my house. You know, obviously right now I don't need grow lights. It's it's very bright out. It's warm out. But in the wintertime when I'm growing these things, which is primarily when I'm growing these things, they're going to be inside. They're going to be under grow lights. And when they're under those grow lights, I can keep them under there for 2 days if I water to 650 grams. After that 2-day period, enough water will have evaporated off or transpired off through the leaves that it's going to be down to a weight of 450 grams. So I'll go ahead and talk about the spectrum of moisture that I use. Basically, that's the full spectrum: 650 grams to 450 grams total weight. That is the spectrum I use to grow. But I don't use that whole spectrum for the entire grow period. When I'm first starting out, it's just a stick in some dirt. It's not really dirt, it's ProMix BX. But when I get the stick in the ProMix and there's no roots or anything, I'm using a much tighter margin, a much tighter band, and it's going to be about 500 grams to 450 grams. And basically, if I water to 500 grams when I'm first starting out, no roots, no leaves, anything, you know, it could take a week to get down to 450 grams, just because I keep my grow room kind of humid. I try to keep it humid, and there's no leaves or anything, so it's going to take a while. And that's convenient for me, because if I've got to water hundreds of plants, you know, that can take a lot of time. And so I want to water as infrequently as possible. And that band 500 to 450, that's going to ensure that I don't have too much water in there. Now, as these things grow, they're going to start getting some leaves, just a few little leaves on there and maybe a few little roots. And as soon as that happens, I'm going to expand that band to 550 to 450 grams, because when that happens, they're going to start using, it's noticeable, they use a lot more water. And so I watered at 550 grams, it may be, you know, 3 days, maybe like half a week. I'll need to water again to get it back up to 550 grams. Now, this is going to go on for a period of time, maybe a month or two. And then eventually this tree is going to get fairly large. You know, it's going to start approaching this size here. And at that point, it's going to have a lot of roots in here. You know, I don't really need to be worried about, even if I did overwater. Let's say I put too much water in here. There's so many roots in here, and there's so many leaves that water is going to get sucked up, and it's not going to stay in there very long. If you put way too much water in a tree pot that has just a cutting with no roots or anything, that water's not going anywhere. It's going to sit in there for weeks, and it's going to rot out your cutting. But in something like this, you put too much water in there, it's just going to get sucked up. In a day, it's going to be gone anyway. So I don't worry about overwatering with a tree like this. What I worry about is underwatering. And like I said, it's going to go through transition, and I'm going to expand that band, that 550 to 450 gram band. I'm going to expand that out to 650 to 450. And that's because I don't want to be watering these things every day. If I got to water these things every day, that's a huge amount of time. If you're trying to do hundreds of cuttings, watering every day, that's a lot of time. So what I try to do is I try to water every other day. And I can do that if I weigh to 650 grams. I get 2 days out of that before I got to water again, before it gets down to 450 grams. Now, 450 grams is the low spec I use. You probably won't actually have any damage if you get just a little bit below 450, but that's kind of what I consider the danger zone. Because if you don't water soon, you will get damage, and it's hard to, you know, that's as close as I want to get to that lower end of the spectrum there. Because when you get down to, like, let's say 350, that means is completely out of water, and all these leaves, they're going to drop, they're going to dry up, the plant itself could die, you know, something like this. This plant is not going to die if you overwater it. Trust me, it's not going to die. I mean, you would have to consistently overwater this thing and significantly in order to do some damage to this thing. The big concern with the trees I'm shipping out is underwatering. That's the big concern. So make sure you're giving this thing enough water. And again, just put it on a scale, water it to a weight of 650 grams, and you're good. Just check it again the next day, check it in another day. If it's, you know, it probably, my grow lights, they go through water pretty quick under the grow lights, but out in a normal atmosphere, it's probably going to take longer to go through that weight down to get down to 450. And you don't have to wait till it gets down to 450. If it's at 550, you want to put in another 100 grams of water weight in there, go for it. It's going to be totally fine. Now, when I ship these out, before I ship it out, I'm actually going to plus up the water a lot more than I would normally do. And I'm going to bring it up to a weight of 900 grams. And that's way more water than I normally put in there. But it's okay. It's totally okay. It's not something to worry about. What that does is it allows the plant to have enough water throughout its entire trip to wherever it's going. Let's say it's going to the West Coast, which is, you know, I'm on the East Coast, so West Coast is going to be about as far as it goes. That could take as much as a week. I ship out on Mondays, so usually it gets there on Friday for the West Coast. But if there's a one-day delay, that pushes it to the next Monday. So let's say it's a full week. 900 grams is going to be enough to last it that full week. Should be no problems. But if you get it and it's more than 650 grams, that's why. Just understand that I had to add a little extra water in there just for shipping. It's not a big deal. But just for some perspective, 900 grams, the reason I use that is because if I were to add just a little bit more water, let's say I got to 950 grams or 1,000 grams, even 950. Let's say 950 grams. If I add 950 grams, the water's going to start coming out the bottom. And 900 grams, it actually won't come out the bottom. So that is the maximum amount you can put in there without getting water coming out the bottom. Because I don't want the pot, the box to get all wet, and then it, like, you know, it sort of damages the pot. So I don't want that. I don't want water coming out the bottom. But I want as much water as I can get in there. So 900 grams, that's as much as you can get in there. And think about this. Let's use this for some perspective. 950 grams. That's how much water you have. That's how much weight you have in here when you water it so that water's coming out the bottom. If you were growing your trees like a cutting, you know, without roots or without you know, or just a little bit of roots or something like that, but just starting out, think about that band I'm using, 450 to 500 grams. That's the band I'm using to have the proper amount of moisture in there. If you were to water until water comes out the bottom, that is a huge, huge amount of water. Way, way, way more water than you need. And that's why people get rot. They're putting way more water in there than they need in that very early stage of rooting. So just think about that. Think about how much, you know, the right amount of water is important. But the key thing here, when I'm sending these out, underwatering is going to be your concern. Not overwatering, underwatering. So keep that in mind. The next thing I will talk about is acclimating your fig trees to the sun. So when I'm growing my fig trees, I'm growing them in grow lights, or you know, later in the season I'll transition to the greenhouse. But even in the greenhouse, this is true. So especially with the grow lights. With the grow lights, they're not getting any UV rays. You know, they're getting. I use pretty good grow lights. You know, they're actual, like, real grow lights. They're not the, you know, just LED bulbs you get at Home Depot or whatever. So they're good. You know, they have a good spectrum, but they don't provide the UV rays that the sun will provide. You know, not that you're going to get bad growth without UV rays, but the problem is if you suddenly expose them to a lot of UV rays, you're going to get a sunburn, just like, you know, I would get a sunburn if I, you know, with my pale skin, if I went out in the sun and wasn't used to it and didn't put any sunscreen on, I would get a sunburn. Well, same sort of concept with the fig trees. You know, if they're not used to the sun and you put them out there, they're going to get all burned and all the leaves are going to get destroyed, and you're going to get set back quite a bit. So before you just put it out in direct sunlight, you got to acclimate it. And what I do is I just stick them in the shade for about a week. And for a week, I do a full week in the shade, full shade. And then if it's you know, if it's partially cloudy, or you know, if you live in maybe a little further north or something, you know, you can probably just put it in direct sunlight right after that. A lot of times I do. If I just look at the weather. If it's going to be cloudy, then I will just put them right outside after that, after the 1 week period, in the full sun area, and they've always been fine for me. Now, if it's a really bright day, if it's you know, you're getting some intense sunlight, you may want to go through an additional transition period where you put them in an area with partial sun for a period of a few days and then transition to full sun. I've done that before as well. So you just got to use your judgment a little bit, but definitely put them in shade for a while before you bring them out into the sun. And that applies for the greenhouse figs as well as the grow light figs. The greenhouse does filter out some of the UV rays. It lets some types of rays through, but there is still some types of UV rays that get filtered out in the greenhouse. So make sure you're acclimating the figs. And the next thing I'll mention is up potting. So I get asked about up potting quite a bit. And, you know, people ask, when should they up pot? And, you know, I'll just tell you, I keep these in 4x4x9 tree pots when I go to ship them. But if I were growing this for my own use, you know, if I was going to keep this and grow it into a big tree here at my house, I would up pot this earlier. I would up pot this sooner. The only reason I keep these in the 4x4x9 tree pots as long as I do is because I want to ship them at a low cost. You know, the compact size here allows me to ship these at fairly low cost anywhere in the United States. So that's why I keep them in the 4x4x9 tree pots. But that doesn't mean that they should stay in 4x4x9 tree pots. You know, when you get this tree, if it's responding well, you know, if it's not in shock, when you put it in its new environment, then go ahead and move it into a larger pot. These things are going to have a good root mass when I ship them out. If I don't think they have a good root mass, I'm not going to ship them out. So it should have enough root mass where you can take it and move it and put it in a new pot, and it's not going to really cause big problems for you. And putting it in a larger pot is going to make things much easier for you. So those roots are going to expand out into that larger volume, and it's going to be much easier to provide it with enough water. It's going to have the room to grow, much larger, more quickly. And so just a lot of good things come from moving it into a larger pot. And like I said, if I was keeping this in my house, I would have moved these into larger pots long before the point where they're at when I'm shipping them out in these pots. So my recommendation, consider up-potting these things as soon as possible. As soon as you feel comfortable that this thing's in good condition, go ahead and move it into a larger pot. The only reason you wouldn't do that is if like me, you're growing a bunch of figs in a small space, and you gotta keep them in a small volume. That's the only reason. But you keep them in a small volume like this, then you really got to watch the water, make sure it has enough water, make sure you don't underwater. So just keep that in mind. The final thing I'll mention is occasionally, despite doing all the right stuff, some people have trouble. They still have trouble with acclimating their fig trees, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. It could be certain varieties have a more difficult time adjusting. It could be specific circumstances. I'm not exactly sure why it is. It usually doesn't happen, but occasionally someone will just have trouble where the fig tree just won't respond well to its new environment. And so one thing you can do, sort of as a last resort, I don't like doing it, but you can do this, is you can remove some of the leaves. And let's say the circumstance where you might need to do this is you get the tree and all the leaves are all drooping down. Maybe some of them are starting to dry up. The top is kind of bent over because it's in shock of some sort. That's the case where you may, and usually this is going to happen in a tree that has a lot of leaves. So let's say this is a tree with a lot of leaves. Those seem to be a little more susceptible to this circumstance. So if that's happening, what you can do, again, is sort of a last resort, is just take off a few of the leaves. You can remove about 1/3 to 1/2 of the leaves, and it should respond positively to that. I'll typically remove the ones near the bottom because those are ones that I'll remove eventually anyway. But when you do that, what should happen, hopefully, is the remaining leaves will perk up. The plant will perk up. Because it doesn't have so many leaves, it's going to have a little bit easier time adjusting. And that usually happens. Sometimes, it's just in such a condition that even that doesn't help. But this is a rare circumstance. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually you water it, you take care of it. And the other thing, if that is happening, the other thing you want to do, probably take it out of direct sunlight, put it in the shade, make sure it has the right amount of water, and those are some things you can do if it's still in shock or something, despite having the right amount of water, and just let it try to recover, and then you should be able to move forward once it recovers. So those are some tips, and hopefully these tips will help you out. Again, I think the watering tip is probably the most important, making sure you get that watering consideration correct. But then you should be all right after that. So hopefully you have a successful growing season, and this little St. Martin will grow into, or whatever tree you get, will grow into a nice big tree. This is that's my big St. Martin right behind me, that this tree came from. Having a pretty good, looks like it'll be a pretty good season for me. Got a lot of little figs on there. Anyway, check out my website. It's www.figlife.com. I've got all my videos on there, and I've got a little blog on there, and then I have links to any sales that I have going on. So check that out. If you got any other questions, my email is pete@figlife.com. Feel free to send me an email, send me any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I hope you have a great growing season, and I hope this video was helpful. Thanks.